Welcome back everyone. Today we have an exciting tutorial where we'll be creating full stack REST APIs using NextJS 13 and MySQL. Our database is hosted on PlanetScale. We'll be covering every aspect of deploying the database on PlanetScale, and we'll be using Prisma as our ORM to connect to our database. Apart from it, we'll be using XORD for our schema validation. We'll be using bcrypt for our pass authentication and encryption, and JSonwebtoken package for creating JWT tokens to log in and verify the tokens. Let's have a quick demo. What exactly are we going to cover? For testing the APIs, I'm using Postman tool. I'll take you through step by step what exactly are we going to build throughout this course. The first API which we are going to talk about is signup API. In this API, we are passing email, username and password as our payload, and we are trying to create the user in our MySQL database. Let's hit send and see what we get as an output. Once we hit send, the record will be entered into our database. If you see the response below, our ID is generated from the database. The email is webdev100@gmail, username and password. If you look at the password, it is kind of a hash password. We'll be using bcrypt to store the password. Generally, we don't provide the password in the response, but for this tutorial, I'm providing that in the response payload. The next step is, by using these details which we have created just now, how to generate the authentication token, or you can say JWT or token. The other API which we are going to create is get auth token. In this API, we are going to pass username and password. Once we hit send with the correct details, as a response, we'll get the token details. This token is nothing but the JWT token, or you can say JSON web token, which contains the session details for how long this person will be logged in into the application without needing any other new token. We'll be using this token for performing our CRUD operations on another API called to do. In this API, we'll be using API key authorization, and we'll be using our token to perform the operations. For example, I want to get all the to-dos against the user webdev100. Let's hit send, and we'll not get any response because we have not created anything. Let's try to post some data. If we go to body, we are saying the title of our to-do is webdev to do 1, and the status for completed is true. Let's hit post and see what we get as a response. The ID for this new to-do is 19. The title is webdev to do 1, completed, updated, and it is attached to the user ID 12. From the token, we are getting all the user related details. Let's try to create one more, and then hit send. A new to-do will get created in the system. When we go and run this method as get, we'll get all the to-dos which we have created against this user. Now what we can do, we are going to talk about the key parameters. Like, we can filter out the to-dos which are completed as true. Hit send, and we'll get only to-dos which are true in nature. And if we say false, then we should be able to get only the false to-dos which are not completed in nature. So we are going to talk about all the CRUD operations using REST APIs. One key thing to remember here is we are going to perform the data validations as part of the body, how to perform the schema validation, how to perform the database validations, and how to give the user correct response. For example, you are getting 200 OK as your response right now, but what if the user passes an incorrect token? For example, I am removing a character from the token and try to send. You'll get an error, invalid token, and the status is 401 unauthorized. How to enable different responses, we are going to cover everything in this video. Also, I'm going to show you how to connect your online database, which is hosted on PlanetScale, to your local machine via MySQL IDE. If you look on the left hand side, you see all the tables which we have got on PlanetScale, and you can query the data as well, which we just created. Web device 100, you can see the password. You can see the auth token which we just generated. We are storing everything in our REST APIs, and the to-dos which we just created. So everything will be stored in the backend. Let's jump right into the coding part. I've created a blank folder called REST API YT in my machine. Let us quickly install NextJS application in this folder. To do that, let's run the command npx create next app at latest in the current directory. Hit enter. Would you like to use TypeScript? No. ESLint yes. Tailwind yes. src no. App router yes. Import alias no. This should install the application very quickly. Now we have installed the NextJS application. Let's install Prisma. npm install Prisma. Now our Prisma is installed. Let's initialize the Prisma. npm npx Prisma init. Once the Prisma is initialized, you should be able to see two folders. One is Prisma, where we have got schema.prisma file, and one .env file got created, where we have got the default PostgreSQL URL provided by Prisma. So now let's go to the PlanetScale website and try to create a MySQL database. To create MySQL database, you have to navigate to planetscale.com. On this website, you have to click on Get Started button to create your login details. Once the login is created, you can log in into this account and click on Go to Dashboard. Once you click on Go to Dashboard, you can start with an empty database. Click on a New Database button and give your database name, REST API YT. This is my database name. The region name, let it be default. Based on your location, you can select a specific region as well. I'm going to select a hobby plan, which is free forever. You have to click on Create Database. Once you click on this Create Database, it will ask you for the credit card details. Don't worry, you won't be getting charged on your credit card. It is just to validate you are a real person or not. I'm going to click Create Database. The framework which we are using to interact with our database is Prisma. So I'm going to select Prisma here, and it is going to provide me all the password related details. So I'm going to click Create Password. Be sure to copy this somewhere. I'm going to copy it somewhere in my machine, and then we'll get going. Now the next steps are, we have to install Prisma. We have done this, and then we have to initialize the Prisma. We have done this as well. The next part is we have to paste this database URL in our .env file. Let's quickly copy this and navigate back to our Next.js project and try to paste this URL in the .env file. So now I have pasted the URL in my .env file. Give it a quick save, and let's head back to the PlanetScale. Now the next step we have to do is we have to go to schema.prisma file and we have to paste this information. This is nothing but the data source as MySQL, and the client is Prisma client.js. Copy this and head back to your Next.js project. Open your Prisma folder, go to schema.prisma file and replace this code with the provided code on planetscale.com. Give it a quick save, and let's head back to planetscale.com. Now it is asking us to run this command npx prisma db push. But before that, we have to write down our schema, which we are going to cover later in this series. But first thing first, we have to create the folder structure which is appropriate for our REST APIs. Let us jump back to our Next.js project and see what all things we have to do. On the Next.js 13 documentation, you can see we have to follow a naming convention of the files. The file for creating REST APIs is called as route.js. This file we generally place under the API folder. Whatever folder structure we follow under the API will become child for that folder, and the route.js file under that folder will become the API route. The convention which we follow for creating REST APIs is export, async function, get, post, patch and delete methods, and we pass the parameter as request. This request parameters captures all the required details coming from the REST API client. Let's create this folder structure in our project. In our project, we have to open the app folder and we have to create the API folder. Under API folder, the first route which we are going to create is sign up. Under sign up, we have to assign one file called route.js. So this is our first route. Let's create the second route. Second route is get auth token. To get the authentication token, we are creating this REST API. Again, we have to follow the same convention, route.js. And then the third folder which we are going to create is to do, to interact with the to do items. Create the route.js file again under to do. For to dos, we are also going to implement the dynamic route functionality. We'll talk about the dynamic routes in a while, but the folder structure which we are going to follow is the square brackets, and we are going to pass ID as the name of this folder. Under this folder, we are going to create one more file called route.js. After creating all these folder structures, we have to understand how we want to interact with our database. To do that, we are going to create some utility methods. In organizations, it is also known as controller methods. To do that, we are going to create a folder on the topmost layer called utils. Under utils, we have to create a folder called token utils, and underneath the token utils folder, we have to create two files, get token.js, and then second one is validate token.js. The second utility package which we are going to create is dbutils. That is for interacting with the database. Create the user.js, todo.js. So after creating all these utility methods, we should be enabled to capture all our business logic in our utility methods. The last thing which we have to do is we have to create one more folder as a library method. In the lib folder, we are going to create a file called Prisma client.js. Here we are going to store the Prisma client details. Now the step-by-step approach is, firstly, we will start writing down our Prisma schema, which identifies our database structure. The second step is we'll write down the utility methods to interact with the database. Third step will be to start creating the REST APIs using those utility methods. So let's talk about how the methods are created. In this tutorial, I'll be focusing on a high level how these models are created, how the utility methods are created. I've created a very detailed CRUD Operations series on the Prisma and MySQL interaction. You can go and watch that series for each and every detail you want to understand. So the very first model which we are going to create is users. This users model has got ID, email, username, password, created at, updated at, and it is related to the token model and the to-do model. Our next model is auth token. So in this auth token method model, we are going to store all the tokens which are generated for a specific user. So we have got again the ID, the token which we are generating, it will be a string and a unique string, created at, updated at, and it is related to user ID. So we have created a relationship between the user ID and the ID field of auth token, and we have added one key parameter on delete cascade. The moment a user get deleted, the auth token should also get deleted. Since we are working with PlanetScale, we have to identify the index as well on the relationships. For example, the relationship here is user ID. So we have to create an index on the user ID and we have to pass the mapping name. So this can be anything as per your wish. The third model is to-do model. Here again, we have got ID, title as to-do title, completed, whether true or false, completed at, created at, updated at, user ID and user. Again, the same relationship we have created. And then at last, we have got the index which we just created for to do. Give this file a quick save and then open up your terminal. In your terminal, we have to write down a command npx Prisma DB push. Once we push this data to the PlanetScale, all our tables will be created. I'll show that to you in a second. Now our schema is installed on the PlanetScale database. Let's go and have a look. On the PlanetScale website, we covered the point till npx Prisma DB push. And let's go to your database overview. On the right hand side on your PlanetScale dashboard, we should be able to see three tables. The first table is auth token, to do, and users. We have created these three tables. Now let us understand how do we connect our MySQL IDE running on our local machine to run the queries on these PlanetScale tables. We have to click on this connect button on the top right, and then under connect with option, you have to select general. So you have got your database, username, host name, and password is must, because when you initially installed your database, you got the password. If you need new password, you can click on the right hand side button, new password, and you should be able to get one. Let's copy this information to MySQL IDE now. So this is the MySQL IDE I have got. You have to click on plus button next to the MySQL connections. You can name the connection as per your wish. So I'm going to name PlanetScale REST API YT. The host name will be provided to you. The host name which we got was AWS connect.psdb.cloud. Port name will remain as is. The username which we have to use is this one. And then we have to pass the password. Since we are not able to see the password, we have to go back to our NextJS project and get the password from there. In the env file, we have got our database URL. The first part before colon is the username, and the next part after colon till @ is the database password. Let's copy this password and go back to our MySQL IDE. Under MySQL IDE, paste the password, hit OK. Default schema will be REST API YT. Test the connection. Successfully made the MySQL connection. Click OK, and you should be able to connect to your PlanetScale database now. There you go. On the left hand side, you can see expand the tables which you just created. We have got user table, to do, auth token table, and we can run the queries as well. So let's try to run select star from REST API YT dot user. You can see we don't have any data right now. Select star from REST API YT dot to do. Select star from REST API YT dot auth token. No tokens, no to-dos are generated so far. So let's try to create the utility methods to get the data into these tables from our code. In our Next.js project, what we have to do, we have to open the lib folder, and in the lib folder, we have created Prisma client. So in the Prisma client, what we have to do, we have to initialize Prisma first. So if you see on my screen, I have copied the code from our previous videos. We have created a variable called Prisma. If the environment variable is production, then we are creating a new instance of Prisma client. Otherwise, we are checking whether global.prisma is there or not. If it is not, then we are instantiating a new client. Otherwise, we are just letting this variable as whatever the current Prisma client initiated as. Give this a quick save. Now to use this Prisma client, we have to go to our utility methods. In the utility methods, firstly, we will focus on the user.js. In the user.js file, I have created two methods. First one is create user, and second one is get user by email. What exactly these methods are? So we are expecting REST API will send a data to us, and that data will be going into the database. In the try catch block, we have written if the data.email is existing, if we are getting data as with the email, then we check whether the email provided in the data is existing or not. If the email is existing, then we have to throw an error. email is already taken. If the data.username is existing, then we have to again find it. If the existing username, then we have to throw a new error. Username is already taken. If all the conditions are passed, then we capture the result and we try to create a new user with the provided data. Data.email, data.username, data.password. And as a result, we return the results back to our originating client. One thing you noticed here is we are not encrypting our password. Let's try to encrypt our password using bcrypt. Let's open our terminal and run the command npm install bcrypt. This package will allow you to securely encrypt your passwords and store them in your database. Let's import that. Import bcrypt from bcrypt. After importing the bcrypt, let's go to our password data. So I'm going to create a variable hashed password, and I'm going to use the bcrypt package bcrypt.hash, and I'm going to pass data.password as a parameter, and the second parameter is the number of salt. So this basically introduces the complexity onto our password. Now we have stored our hashed password. Let's use this password while creating our user record. Give it a quick save. Now let's look at the second method, export const get user by email. Here we are validating whether a user exists in the system or not. If the user exists, then we will pass on the results to the client. After creating the user utility method, let's go to the todo.js. In the todo utility method, we are creating 5 methods. First one is create todo, get todos, get todo by ID, update a todo, and delete a todo. I've covered all these details in a separate video, and that's why I'm skipping this. If you still want to learn, you can click on the video appearing on the right hand side. Let's look at these methods one by one. In create todo, we are simply getting the user ID and the to-do data as our input, and we are just creating this data. In our get todos, we are getting user ID again and completed as a parameter. If we want to pass completed, then it gets applied, otherwise it will be undefined. Prisma ignores the undefined parameters. The default sorting order is descending. Get to do by ID. So in this method, we are just simply passing the user ID for which the token has been raised and the to-do ID for which we want to get the results. If the length is greater than 0, then it is fine. We are returning the data. Otherwise, we are throwing a new error, no data found. Update to do. We are taking the ID, to-do ID, user ID and to-do data. We are firstly understanding for which ID we want to update, for which user ID we want to update. And then in the data, we are taking the title coming from the to-do data and the completed status from the to-do data. Once everything is done, we return back the updated results. Lastly, we have got delete to do. In the delete to do method, we are just simply getting the data, ID and user ID. We get the details and then we just simply delete everything. Here we should be passing the deleted result as well. Give it a quick save. All the methods are complete for the utility. Let's talk about the token utility methods. So first one is get token. In this method, we are going to create tokens for the client. So to create the tokens, firstly we have to install one more package. Let's go to our terminal and run the command npm install jsonwebtoken. It will install a package which will enable us for JWT. Once the package is installed, then we are going to export a new function, generate token. It will be an async function, and this will receive two details, email and password. If the email and password provided to us is correct, then we will give the token to the user. So we'll create a try catch block in the catch block, we are going to simply throw error dot message. In the try block, firstly we have to understand whether the user provided is existing in the system or not. So we are validating const user await Prisma dot user, sorry, it should be get user by email. This method we are going to use, and we are going to pass email as a parameter. If the user exists in the system, then it is fine. Otherwise, we are going to return everything back to the user. Now let's understand whether the password provided to us is correct or not. To do that, we are going to use the bcrypt method, and we are going to reverse engineer the password which is provided to us. So we are going to await bcrypt. I need to import bcrypt first. Import bcrypt from bcrypt dot compare, and the password which we are getting as a parameter, and user dot password. So in the user resultant, we are getting the password which is hashed in the database. We are comparing both the passwords. If these are okay, then it is fine to proceed further. Otherwise, we are going to throw a new error, invalid credentials. Let's proceed further. Now to generate a JWT token, what we have to do, we have to write const token, and we have to sign a JWT method. In this, we have to identify what all fields we want to store. So the very first field we want to store is user ID, and we are again using the user variable which we created on top for the initialization. And then we have to tell what is our client secret. So what we have to do, we have to store our environment variable JWT secret. Let's copy this and go to our .env file. Below database URL, let's create a secret. Save this and go back to our todo.js. Sorry, getToken.js. Once we have identified the secret, then we have to tell in what time this token will expire. So expires in 1 hour. We can pass this token details like this. There is another way of passing the token. I'll show you how. I'll comment this token and create one more constant, const token, and we'll use again the JWT sign method, but this time we are going to use a structure which looks like this. User ID, again we are using user.id. Then we are going to use IAT, the token issue time. So we have to create a value in issue time, and then exp, it will be the expiration time. So we have to create these two values as well. Again the same thing, we have to provide the process.env.jwt secret. That's how you can create the token as well if you want to control the initiation time, issue time, and the expiration time. But for our example, we are okay with the above approach. Let's uncomment this, and we are going to get the token out of here. After getting the token, what we have to do, we have to pass this token into our database because we are assigning this to a specific user. So we are going to await Prisma.authToken.create, and in this we are going to create the data which we just captured. The first one is token, and the second one is user ID, will be user.id. So these two details we are storing in our auth token. Let's return the token to the client, which is calling the method, and we are done with the auth token part. Give this a quick save. Now let's try to validate our token. To validate the token, we have to again reverse engineer our token which we are receiving. So let's create a method validate token. It will again be async function and it will be receiving token as an input. Once token is received, we are going to have a try catch block, throw new error dot message. We are going to create a error message as a variable and then decoded token. Now we are trying to verify the JWT token, but before that we have to import JWT. Import JWT from JSON web token. JSON.verify the token which we have received as parameter, and then process.env.jwt secret. Once we receive this secret, we should be able to validate everything. Moreover, if you want to validate what was the error received during this validation process, you can extend this function further. So I'm going to add one more function as a parameter, error, and decoded as a method. We are going to check if error exists. Then we are going to throw new error as error dot message, and then else we are going to return the decoded message. Okay, so that's how we can use to message out properly what exactly has happened during a decode process. After this, we have to return the decoded token to the calling client. Let's give it a quick save and format this. Everything is looking fine. Now let's jump into the REST API codes. For the REST API, we have created API folder, and then we have created 3 folders. We are going to focus on sign up process first. In the sign up process, we need to create a post method where users can provide data, and by using that data, system should be able to create that data in the database. Export const get method, it will be an async request, and in the parameter it gets the request. Oh, it should be post method. So once we have created our post method, we have to understand few things. I'll start writing comments. Firstly, we have to get the details provided by user, understand whether the details are correct as expected, that is the schema validation, whether the details exist in the system or not. For example, the username or the email already exist in the system or not, and then return the result if everything looks fine. So now to get the details from the user provided, we have to initialize one variable const JSON, and we will be getting request data from the request.json. So the parameter which we are getting, we can extract the JSON data from there. Understand whether the details provided are correct or not, or as expected. So what we have to do, we have to create a validation method, schema validation method. To create this, let's jump up and create a schema validation. But before doing that, let's open up our terminal and see what we have to do. We have to install one more package, Zod. Zod is nothing but a schema validation package for the inputs. Now we have installed Zod. Let's import Zod from Zod. Now we have installed Zod. We have to understand the schema structure. So create user schema will be like a object, Zod object, and under this the object, the details which we are expecting is email, which will be of type string, as well as we are expecting this to be a nature of email. The second parameter we are expecting is username. It will again be z.string. Third thing which we are expecting is password, which will be z.string as well. Anything apart from these three should not be allowed. To do that, we have to provide a strict mode to this schema. Let's create a validate user schema method where we are going to get the data. In this validation method, we are going to validate the schema details. Const parse data equals to create user schema, the schema which we just created, and parse it against the data which we are getting as a parameter. Return parse data as our output if everything looks fine. If we get error, then we have to throw new error dot message. So that's how you can validate your schema. We are going to beautify our error details in a moment, but right now let's keep it throw new errors as our details. Let's use this schema validation as our method. Const validated user equals to validate user schema, the method which we just created, and then we are going to pass JSON which we just received as our parameter. Third thing which we are going to validate is whether the details exist in the system or not. If you remember, in our utility method for users, we validated whether the email exists, whether the username exists in the system or not. If those details exist in the system, we get our error. Email is already taken, username is already taken. So let's go back to our route.js and then use this method. Const create user result, await create user, and then we are going to pass the validated user which we just got, and then we are going to return the create user result to the end client. Now to pass the details for the post method, we can't simply say return create user results. We have to use another package called next response. So next return next response. Firstly, I have to import this. Import next response from next server, and we are going to return next response. The data which we are returning here will be passed on like this. Also, in this method, we can pass the status. The status codes, I'm going to cover all the status codes in very detail. For now, if everything looks fine, we have to pass the status as 200. The catch block will again be like return next response error.message, and then status will be 500. For any exceptions, we are saying the error response is 500. Give it a quick save and let's go to our Postman, try to test this API. To test this API, we have to again open up our terminal and then we have to run the command npm run dev. Our next server is starting now. Let's go to our Postman to validate the REST API. I've opened Postman. Let's try to create a new request. The method for this request will be post. The URL which we are going to select is localhost 3000 API and then the route which we created, sign up. Let's go to our body and we have to select JSON as our package. The details which we are looking for is email, @gmail.com, username, and password. Password 123. Try to hit send and let's see the response. If you look at the response, we get ID 1 as our username, the email got created, the username got created, and the password is an encrypted string which is coming via bcrypt. Let's try to test some more functionality. We validated our schema as well. Let's try to add one more D at the end of password. Let's hit send. If you look at this, we are getting an error. It is saying unrecognized key in the object password with double D, and it is saying the message required for the key password is not available. Let's correct this and let's try to validate whether our database function for validating username and email are working or not. Hit send again. Email is already taken. Let's try to change the email to 101 and hit send. Username is already taken. So all these validation errors are coming from the database utility methods. If we try to add one more field, for example, let's add one more field, test. This field is not understood by Zod, and because of that, we will get an error, unrecognized keys test. So Zod does not recognize this, and that's how we can restrict users to enter junk data in our REST APIs. Now let's try to beautify this error message which we are getting out of Zod. Go back to our Zod validation user schema method, and in the catch error section, what we have to do, we have to say if error has got issues and error.issues.length is greater than 0, then we have to map out all the issues. So const validation errors equals to error.issues.map. If you want to understand the map method more, I've created an entire playlist about it, all the error methods. You can see it on your right hand side. Now I'm mapping over the issues. So issue.path.join, and the second thing which we are going to do is message will be issue.message. Now we are going to come out of this, and then we are going to say throw new error JSON.stringify validation errors. Else, if it does not have multiple error, then we can simply say throw new error and invalid schema as our error. In the catch section of the post request, we have to parse the exception which we are getting from Zod. To do that, firstly create a variable error message, then try error message equals to JSON.parse. We are trying to parse the error message. If it is failing, then we are going to catch this into the parse error, and then we are going to say error message will be simply error.message. Now we are going to return, instead of error.message, we are going to return error and the error message. Give it a quick save and let's go back to our REST API and try to test it. Hit send again and see how beautifully we are getting our error responses. There is an error, email is already taken. If I try to validate, username is already taken, there is an error. Also, if I try to validate the schema errors, like I post D, it says error, path password is not required. Looks like there is a problem. We are getting error like a string. Still we are getting error response as a string. Let's go back to our code and validate what went wrong. In the message section, we are passing issue.message. The spelling was incorrect. Let's try to rerun our code. It is still appearing as string. Let's try to debug again. Here as well, the spelling is incorrect. Let's try to rerun this. Now you can see we are getting error messages so beautifully. You can validate these error message in the source system from where you are calling the REST APIs. The path password is required and there is an unrecognized key which is password. Similarly, if we try to add one more unrecognized key, test, which is not recognized by Zod, it will say unrecognized key object test. So that's how you can implement the error responses beautifully in your system. Now, one more thing. Let's try to delete everything. What error message are we going to get? See, unexpected end of JSON input. That means we are not getting any JSON input. And for each error method, if you see, we are getting 500 internal server error. So that's how you implement your REST APIs. In the next part, we are going to talk about how to implement token authentication and how to use this token authentication in your REST APIs.